Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition for this study, and we turn now to the little poem 372, I Know Lives I Could Miss. Now you can circle the word lives in your volume and simply put people or put possibly acquaintances as opposed to friends. Now, it is interesting. We are in some ways back to poem 303, and you'll maybe remember that when we did this poem, we commented on Emily and her idea of friendship. Is Emily, see, this is the question, is Emily a happy-go-lucky person who has all of these acquaintances in her life, especially through correspondence? Or is Emily a person who struggles with being gregarious or friendly? To what degree is Emily a tortured artist? You'll remember this 303 poem. The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door to her divine majority present no more. Unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation. Choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone. It's interesting that she will use the word one in this poem in 303. In 372, it will be the number 2. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily. And if you have, I'm hopeful that you've already worked with our set of introductory comments, and I'm hopeful that you've worked with the preceding 371 poems. We just finished with 371, a precious moldering pleasure. And of course, you could make the argument that after we did 371, where she talks about basically her friendship or her love of books, it might very well be the case that Emily had more in common with artists and poets and writers of earlier times than she had with her own time and generation. It's an interesting argument. Now, Emily will comment on her possibly 2 and only 2 friends. Some have speculated it's Sam Boyles and Sue. And there's some interesting comments that Emily made through her letters. So, for example, she said in letter 275 of roughly this time, she was writing to Sam Boyles, how, quote, how extraordinary that life's large population contains so few of power to us. David Priest points this out, by the way, the great scholar. Nor did she change when Thomas Higginson met her for the first time in 1870. For one of her comments, which he passed on from letter 342a to his wife, was, quote, how do most people live without thoughts? This is again Emily. How do most people live without thoughts? There are many people in the world. You must have noticed them in the street. How do they live? How do they get strength to put on their clothes in the morning? Finally, Sylvia Townsend Warner will record a similar opinion in her diaries when she writes about Emily, quote, Emily suggesting, walking along Smith Street among all those spiritless shopping women, the thought came into my mind, why did all those poor creatures take so much trouble to get onto their hind legs? Now, some will see Emily as at times having a sense of misery or suffering or pain, and she will then kind of withdraw from the world. Others will see, no, this has been Emily the entire time. Emily has far less time for other people than she has for her art, her craft, and of course her poems. Let's read the poem. You get to decide. I know lives I could miss without a misery, others whose instants wanting would be eternity. The last a scanty number, 'twould scarcely fill a 2. The first a gnat's horizon could easily outgrow. Now, notice the balance of this poem. Notice that she'll begin with that observation, I know lives. Of course, to what degree she actually knows them is going to be central possibly to how you interpret this poem. I could miss without a misery. In other words, she says, I know lots of people, but if they were to leave, I really wouldn't care that much about that fact. Others, notice the dash, whose instance wanting, and of course this is the desire for them, would be eternity. In other words, there are a few folks in my life who, without them, my life means very, very little. Shall we call them pals or friends? Then she'll talk about the last, in other words, who are my true friends? A scanty number, notice number capitalized, 'twould scarcely fill a two. In other words, she says, honestly, I only have a couple of very close friends. Now, notice she doesn't say who they are. Scholars have speculated that she's talking here about Sam Boyles and Sue, Austin's wife, and of course, Emily's closest pal. The first, all those other people, a gnat's horizon could easily outgrow. In other words, these acquaintances, these quote-unquote, others, their significance is really no bigger than the distance between a gnat and its horizon. In other words, insignificant in almost every way. Notice, by the way, we go from eternity to horizon. What exactly is it that Emily is saying in this poem in 2a? How are we going to help us to get to a theme or a message? I think the argument that she's making is the only thing that really matters in life are those select few pals that we have in our lives. Not a bunch, just a few. Our life is constructed around just a handful of folks. For her, she says, scanty two, right? Barely two. At 2b, the tone of this poem has been the subject of a lot of debate. Is it defiant? I only have two friends and I'm proud of it. Or is it more sad and lugubrious? The truth is, I've only got two people that really I could care much about their passing. Everybody else I really don't care very much about. At 3a, well, it does beg the question, what is Emily's relationship to friendship or pals? She uses the word friendship for the first time in poem number 2, and she uses the word friend or friendship in 65 different poems. So it's obvious that she has given a lot of thought to this topic. By the way, when we get to at the very end of the Johnson edition, near the end of it, and in poem 1568, this is how she'll say it there. And we'll come back to this poem. We don't know who it is that she's writing about, but it's significant. To see her is a picture, to hear her is a tune, to know her an impertinence as innocent as June, to know her not affliction, to own her for a friend, a warmth as near as if the sun were shining in your hand. Many of us have said this is one of the great poems of friendship. It takes us back, of course, to our study of Aristotle and his view of friendship as well, and the fact that for Aristotle, there's nothing more important than friendship. Think about St. Augustine in Confessions and the passing of his beloved friend in Confessions 8. We've commented on it at learnstrong.net. Finally, for you to own a poem like this, do you have lots of pals, or are you more inclined to say that it is scanty, the number of pals that you have, and to what degree is maybe Emily helping you to be a pal? Thank you.